Labas, Europia. This is how you say hello in Lithuanian. And this is how you hear to be or not to be in Lithuanian. Hamlet, William Shakespeare, in his famous passage. Let's hear it. Būti ar nebūti, štai mįslė. Kas prakilniau? Ar nusilenkti dvasiui, strėlėms ar dūžiams atšiauraus likimo? Ar su ginklu prieš negandų marias į kovą stot ir jais nusikratyti? Numirt, užmigt ir tiek, ir baigt užmigus širdies kančias bei sopulių šimtus, kuriuos iš prigimties paveldi kūnas. O tokia pavydėtina dalia. Kas nesidžiaugtų? Mirt, užmigt.
Dobry wieczór, Europo.
Dobry wieczór, Europo.
Mamy dzisiaj dla Państwa wiersz Juliana Tuwima, Zosia Samosia. Jest taka Zosia, nazwano ją Zosia Samosia, bo wszystko sama, ważna mi dama. Wszystko sama lepiej wie, wszystko sama robić chce. Dla niej szkoła, książka, mama nic nie znaczą, wszystko sama. Zjadła wszystkie rozumy, więc co jej porozumie? Uczyć się nie chce, bo po co? Gdy sama wszystko umie. A jak zapytać Zosi, ile jest 2 i 2?
8.
A kto był Kopernik?
Król.
A co nam Śląsk daje?
Sól.
A gdzie leży Kraków?
Nad Wartą.
A uczyć się warto?
Nie warto, bo ja sama wszystko wiem. I śniadanie sama zjem, i samochód sama zrobię. I z wszystkim poradzę sobie. Kto by się tam uczył, pytał, dowiadywał się i czytał. Kto by sobie głowę łamał, kiedy mogę sama.
Toś ty taka mądra dama, a kto głupi jest?
Ja sama.
Dziękujemy bardzo.
Dziękujemy.
Hello Europe. Sveika Eiropa. Tā nepaliks, tā nevar palikt, un nepaliks par velci cerot, ka straumi sīks, ka ūdeņi pārskries un aprimsies un atkal viss pavacamies. Lai ledus cik stiprs, cik skaisti mirdz, pēc brīva, pēc dzīva ilgojas sirds, tā nevar palikt, tā nepaliks. Līdz pašam pamatam jauns viss tiks. Jānis Rainis. And the meaning of it, loosely translated, is it won't stay like this. It can't stay like this, and it won't stay like this. It's futile to hope that the stream will cease, that the waters will stop and calm, and everything will be like it was before. However strong is the ice, however beautiful it is, you want to be free, you want to be alive, that's what your heart hopes for. It can't stay like this, it won't stay like this. To the very roots, everything will be new. Thank you. Bye, Europe.
W Szczebrzeszynie chrząszcz brzmi w trzcinie. Dzień dobry.
Добрый день с Латвии. Sveiki, привет. Я узнал, что у меня есть огромная семья. И тропинка, и лесок, поле, каждый колосок, речка, небо голубое. Это все мое, родное. Это родина моя. Всех люблю на свете я.
Wrażenia tańczą tuż pod skórą, nurkują coraz głębiej. Mój dotyk, twój dotyk, drzwi do raju otwierają się, codzienność porzucam, staję się sobą. Maskę poprawności zrzucam, przebranie ściągam, dobry wieczór uczuciom, dobranoc obowiązkom. Mglisty moment, gorąca czekolada spływa. Rozluźnia zmęczone wnętrze, miłości wytchnienie, zapraszają indywidualność. Dobry wieczór tkliwości, witaj szczęście. Zapominam wrzaski, pchnięcia, obojętność, bezczelność. Harmider zamieniam w chrapanie psiaka. Żar sytości zalewa ciało uczuciami. Odprężenie nadchodzi, spotykam siebie. Przytulam swoje szczęście. Zamykam oczy. Uczucia z gwieździstym niebem się witają. Otwieram kolejne drzwi. Pozwalam latu odejść. Liście opadają, lecz nie uczucia.
Ein Rosenkranz rückwärts. Kad sanjam. I kad sanjam, sanjam bez jezika ili na svima istovremeno. I kad sanjam, sanjam da bih sve to napisala ovim riječima. Ne bi se promijenile ni ruke, ni noge, ni glava. Ne bi. Ali bi doticaj bio drugačiji. Svima. Jer te riječi gledaju i slušaju kao iz nekog drugog puta, kao iz nekog drugog vremena, kao iz 90. ili od onog trenutka kad su opet i opet rekli idemo. Broje od tada unatrag, no i danas dalje sjede gdje bura puše i jugo puše, pa opet bura puše, stalno. Ein Rosenkranz rückwärts. Und wenn ich träume, träume ich, sprachlos und zugleich alle Sprachen. Und wenn ich träume, träume ich, wäre all dies in jenen Worten geschrieben, würden sich weder Hände noch Füße noch der Kopf ändern. Nein, doch die Berührung wäre eine andere, für alle, weil jene Worte wie aus einer anderen Richtung zuhören, wie aus einer anderen Zeit zusehen, wie aus den 90ern oder diesem Moment, als sie wieder und wieder sagten, wir gehen. Sie zählen seit damals rückwärts und sitzen noch heute dort, wo die Bura weht und der Jugo weht und dann wieder die Bura weht. Für immer.
Good afternoon and welcome to our talk, which is part of this year's celebration of the European Language Day, hosted as usual by the Instituto Cervantes. My name is Silvana and I am graduated a long time ago in Rome in Italian literature, and I was awarded a PhD in cinema by the University of Salford in Greater Manchester. I am a committee member of the Società Dante Alighieri Italian Institute here in Manchester, and for them I teach Italian language and culture and organize different events, but mostly about cinema. On behalf of Dante Alighieri, let me thank the Instituto Cervantes for the kind and efficient hospitality, and let me also greet all the Italians who are watching with a buon pomeriggio e benvenuti al nostro talk. As you can see from the slide, the title is The Influence of Latin on European Languages and the Rising of Value of Italian in Various Career Fields. Therefore, I'm going to touch 2 points, and my aim is to leave you with a few more information on the communal Latin roots many European languages shares, and as well as with a sort of update on the motivation on why more and more people decide a turn to start some Italian. On the first point, I want to see how the Latin influence took 2 opposite directions in Europe. On the eastern side, the nations kept mostly the grammar, the structure. First of all, by keeping the 3 genders, which is the masculine, the feminine, and the neutral. And of course, the 6 cases system articulated in 2 different forms in the singular and in the plural. As we can see in our next slide, you will remember that in Latin there were no article and no preposition, and so this meant that each word has to change 6 times according to its function. So if we take the word friend, it will have amicus if it was a subject, amici of the friend, amico to my friend, amicum if it was the direct object, amice by my friend, and last amico, oh my friend, which was the form vocative which was used in poetry. And of course, remember that in the plural, they would change another time, 6 times for every position. In the Western region, instead, the Latin language grammar was simplified as much as they could. Well, they preserved the vocabulary with a very, very slightly different modification. Before getting into some details, I would like with you to remember our timeline. So as we all know, we count our time from the year 0, which corresponded to the year of Christ's birth. On our timeline, before Christ's birth is decreasing. So it means that it goes from 100 to 0. And we also have to remember that sometimes these are indicated with BCE, which means before communal era, because the country who are not religious in the sense of Christian or Catholic, they call it communal era. Instead, after Christ's birth, we have from 0 to 100 and so on, in the sense that it increased, and some simplification is AD, which, by the way, is not after death, is not an English after death, is the Latin Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord, and of course the other nation call it communal era. Okay, so now in our current year 2020, it is from 0, the birth of Christ, to now 2020. Okay, now the historical context. According to historians, Rome was founded in 753 BC, and it is understood from various documents and inscriptions that the kingdom was ruled from the very beginning according to established unwritten rules. However, following several unrest against the arbitrary decision by the aristocracy in 451, 10 men, which were called decemviri, from the two Latin words decem means 10, viri means men, were put in charge of writing down the law. And in 449 BC, they produced the so-called 12 tables. These 12 tables of the law were kept into the forum, which was the place where everything was discussed. These 12 tables represent the first complete body of Latin. In itself, that was an important step towards a fairer judgment of the misdeed, as it limited the decision being too often in favor of the upper class. Meaning also that there was a firm affirmation from the Roman people, dura lex, sed lex, a harsh law, yet a law, which was the important meaning of saying, if you disagree, the only way out is to change the law. So as we can see, this principle, the entire Roman law system that developed from these tables, and most of its terminology is still largely applied nowadays in the Western world and also in its terminology. About the vocabulary, just a few examples, which I'm sure you have come across. The first one is versus, which is quite interesting because we can see this every week in the football matches. For instance, we can say Juventus versus Barcelona. Or nexus, the connection link. Pro tempore, temporary. Post-mortem, after death, which is an expression used in the coroner's report that we hear all the time in many crime movies and TV series. Ad personam, many documents have this expression, which means just for that person. The quid pro quo, which is a trade-off used in all kinds of negotiation. If we talk about a defendant in a crime system, usually it means a lighter sentence in exchange of a confession or information relevant to the crime, and also very currently used in these weeks, status quo, the existing state of affairs, especially in social and political issues. So as you can see, lots of Latin we see every day. And I can say that even a greater use worldwide today of the Latin terminology is made for medicina, medicine, biologia, biology, and chimica, chemistry. With regard to the literature, which is the main source of information about how people communicate at a certain time in their history, the earliest evidence of the Latin language relates to the work of the Roman playwright Plautus, who was born in 254 BC and died in 184 BC. His plays, which have been very popular ever since, have arrived to us, down to us, almost in its entirety. And historians and literate have ascertained that it has been the source for the Shakespeare play, The Comedy of Errors, which is quite interesting. So in the 1st century BC, the classic Latin was established completely in all forms of the life. So we have work for philosophical, political, and historical purposes. And about this very great body of work, I mention only Cicero, which is on the top of the slide, and Caesar, that you can see on the bottom of the slides, with one of these most important work, which was De Bello Gallico, which is about the war with France. It is very important because for the historians, it gave lots and lots of information about both Italy and France at the time. With the expansion of the Roman Empire, as you can see, Latin became the official language for political, legal, and administrative purposes, and was perpetuated. That's the reason maybe why Latin has persisted in our languages by the Catholic Church, who continued for ever since to use Latin both to communicate and especially to write very important documents. No surprise then that still nowadays in the folds of the languages we have so much Latin. So if we look at the map, you can see the Germania Superior and a little bit down Dacia. Where you see Dalmatia, you have also Dacia on the right. Okay, so if we look at German, the German is affiliated not only to the Dutch language, but also to Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian. The grammar is mainly structured on the Latin. They have preserved the 3 genders, masculine, feminine, neutral. They have preserved 4 cases out of 6. This means they have less articles and less preposition. The use, very diffuse, of the conjunctive tense of the verb for all students of Italian, both native and non-native, conjunctive is the monster of Latin and Italian. And finally, the order of the words, because mainly sentences in German have the verb at the end of the sentences like Latin used to have. We move to Romania. As you can see, the name was given to this country by the Roman in the greater area which were called Dacia. So very importantly, and first of all, although Romania is around or is surrounded, better to say, by Slavic nation and therefore Slavic languages, Romania does not use the Cyrillic alphabet, but use the Latin alphabet. This is very important. And of course, again, the persistence of Latin in this region, which is more or less isolated in their Latin towards the other country around her, is the Orthodox Christian Church, still nowadays very important in that nation. With regard to the grammar, Romanian has retained even more than Germany, with 5 cases out of 6, the 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neutral, with singular and plural, conjugation of the verbs with all the extended modes and tenses. Instead, the Latin origin of the vocabulary, of course, has been blended by borrowings from and adaptation to the Slavic languages that are around her. Moving to Western Europe, I go back a little bit on the map. So on the Western Europe, we are going to start from the area which is now Portugal and Galicia. And we will start from Portugal and Galicia, and then to Spain, and then to France. So what is the Portuguese importance is that they have preserved the Latin vocabulary, but it has been blended with some Arabic sounds, as in 711, when the empire fell down, the Roman went away from Portugal, there were the Arabs. The Arabs came over and they ruled until the 13th century, so for a very long time. Nowadays, the modern Portuguese languages have the particularity of having the pervasive use of the vowel U and of the diphthong AO. So, of course, as I was saying before, the three languages which has retained closely the Latin, not structure, but the vocabulary is Italian, Spanish, and French. They didn't take the grammar because, luckily for the students, in the Middle Ages, so we are talking about the 1200 and 1300, the three nations had in common poetry, and therefore there was an introduction, a creation of the articles and preposition, which of course limited greatly the changing of the noun 6 times in the singular and 6 times in the plural. Okay, now I'm going to give you very, very few examples, trying to understand, just give you an idea of how close they are. Okay, so I give the example and the translation will be in order: Italian, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. And I apologize, of course, for my pronunciation of the other languages. So the word I've chosen is amor in Latin, which means love, and is amore, amor, amor, amor. Meus amor, which means my love, is amore mio, mi amor, mon amour, and meu amor. The sentences: te amo de todo corde, I love you with all my heart. We have to remember the subjective case of heart, which is cor, and therefore we have ti amo con tutto il cuore, te amo con todo mi corazón, je t'aime de tout mon cœur, eu te amo de todo o me cor. So as you can see, very, very close. If we move, this was the second conjugation. So if we move, the third conjugation, we move to the first one, which always ended with a, we have nostra patria, our homeland, which is very, very close. Nostra patria, nuestra patria, notre patrie, nossa patria. Again, on the third conjugation, liber, which means book, is libro, libro, livre, libro. Liber novus est, you see the verb at the end of the sentence, the book is new. In English, il libro è nuovo, el libro es nuevo, el libro è nuovo, o libro è nuovo. Okay? So these are very, very simple example, just to give you an idea of the connection between the languages. And now, before closing this our overview, I cannot leave a reflection on how also English has actually preserved much in Latin in its language. So first of all, before going to the vocabulary, let's have a look at the interesting things that England or Great Britain has kept all the Roman measurements. So for the distance, we have the mile, milia, which in Latin were 1,000 steps. And among other testimonies, where we have the mile marking the distance along the Adrian walls in Cumbria, in Carlisle. If you go to visit, you can have a look, where every mile a guard tower was positioned. Then we have the feet, pedes, which for Romans were around 30 centimeters, and for English is a little bit higher, as well as for the weight, which is libra and pound is libra and pondus with 327 grams. English is, I think, is a little bit higher than 400 grams. Ounce, which is uncha, around 27 grams. I think English is about 30 grams. For the liquid, this is very interesting. So the measure with which you buy your lager at the pub actually comes from Latin, which is pinta, which means painted, from the Roman use of painting the amphora. The amphora were those terracotta storage jar. They used to color these jars, these amphoras, in different colors according to their capacity, especially for the trading. However, the measure pinta was used throughout Western Europe, especially France and Spain, until 1791, when the metric system was introduced. Alongside with everybody else, we have also the time. We did the formula AM and PM, ante-meridian. Ante in Latin is ante, before, and post, as we have said before, means after. And sometimes, if you note, also in English, they have the spelling meridian and not meridian. Okay, so this is very, very interesting to see. Then I can also give you some of the words that we meet in our daily lives in England, which goes back to Latin words. So the first one, which is worldwide, is computer. Computer comes to the verb computare, which means to count, to elaborate in mathematical terms. Then the second word worldwide is media, which was media, is the plural of medium, and means the means through which you obtain something or you do something. Curriculum vitae, that everyone applying for a job has to do, has bump into these two words. The same is in English and in Latin, and means a very brief account of a person experience nowadays for jobs. In the past, for the Roman times, was a little bit more extended, their experience, who they were, where they came from, and so on. Then we have the word crime, which is crimen. Exit, everywhere is exit, and is exitu. It is part of the verb exeo, which means to leave a place. Chemical, which was chemic, with, interesting enough, together with chemistry, also the pronunciation is kept in Latin, because in English, as you know, the CH sounds as in the word church. Then we have area, art, from the declination of ars, art is art, and so on. Transport, which is made of two Latin words. Trans, which means that run from A to B. And port is the first part of the verb portare, to carry, to convey. For the word transfer, especially in finance stuff, same, from A to B with trans, and fero is the verb that meant to bring ahead. To desire, desiderare is the infinitive of the Latin. To decide, decidere is the Latin infinitive. And then we have nation and everything related with the shown sound. In this case, I put international, because the spelling is the same as in Latin. The difference is that in English, T-I-on, you pronounce sh, nation, while in Latin it was a Z, natio, nationis, and the word inter means between, okay? Maybe you can remember, if you go to the theater, interval, which means inter, the two parts. Okay, alia, the two parts, inter alia, the two parts of a play, interval, or a concert. Then we have the verbs prohibited, prohibitum, urban, urbanus, from the noun urb, which in Latin meant city. And then I close this little briefing with the lovely word splendid, which is splendidus. Okay, so we could go on and on. To you, I leave the, if you wish, the fun to discover in your daily life, in your study, the etymology of the words, the roots, possibly Latin, of the words that you use and you come across. Okay, now we pass to the second element of my talk, which is why nowadays people study Italian. Italian study has been always perceived as a cultural language, a language of leisure, if you want. Instead, recently we have monitored a little shift of why people study Italian, and these are related to job, and this is very important for either us and either the people that study. So, for instance, among all other experiences, I will just touch a few experiences we have had recently in our institute. So in the scope of the Venice Biennale Art Festival that you might have heard of, which is a very important international festival, the people involved in the preparation of the English pavilion have found useful and constructive to be able to communicate in Italian with the local technician and staff they had to work with. Then fashion industry, we have many fashion companies that they still are based in Italy, but they employ designers from all over the world. So if the designer department is an international one, and therefore English is the language to communicate, when they move to the prototype department, where they have to do the prototype of the model, these are made by Italian lady, not young, and with very scarce or no knowledge at all of English. This is why, because their expertise are very practical. Therefore, they come from art crafts and laboratory of the local situation, which has grown up and continued to develop and to be continued in the tradition locally in Italy. So therefore, for any designer, it is very important to pass information, to receive the feedback in a very precise and clear way in order not to make any mistake and not to waste any time. Close to these fashion things, but also to equipment, we move to sport industry. Italian sport industry is very active, but there are also some industry here in UK, especially in the biking, in the bicycles, you know, and tennis, of course, and mountaineering, etc. So these people have found, and the company have found, that knowing a little bit of Italian and also their culture, they are prepared in two ways. They are prepared to sort of exchange the inspiration by understanding the motivation why Italy moves in a certain direction, and at the same time to know very precisely the Italian specificity in terms of taste on color, on form, on material, so that they can set up a very good, effective opportunities to export to Italy. Then we move to music. On my slide, you can see the Arena di Verona. You might be aware of it, where there is one of the most important stage where the opera is performed in Italy. And so the people in UK that are involved into presenting and organizing opera events in UK, they have found that knowing a little bit more precisely, more realistically, that particular word historically and also recently, they can organize these events to a UK audiences in a more enjoyable way and in a more informed way. We pass to the tourism, and this slide shows you Manchester, and I'm talking about tourism that, of course, is working here. And among other situations, we have had a lovely experience with hotels that in the past have received the Italian football teams for various events. And what happened was that because some of the staff have learned some Italian, they were able to contribute to create a very serene and clearer atmosphere for everybody. So everything went very smooth. They were all very pleased of how the thing ever turned out. And last one, I put food. Of course, food is almost number one in the thinking of many non-Italian, but also Italian people. And here I don't talk about the chef of the television. I talk about chef or whoever is involved in making food on the ground. And so we have this this experience that many more people that want to enter into this career, non-Italian, they are using now to travel to Italy in order to understand and maybe to discover recipe and new ingredients. And of course, to do that, you have to travel in very popular route. You have to discover a more hidden route, and therefore knowing Italian is something that can make a difference in making this journey as efficient, as productive as possible. Okay, I stop here. My talk ends here. I really hope you have enjoyed it, and you have now made a little bit curious to know more about the European languages, and why not to study one of them. So I want to finally thank you, all of you, for watching, and I leave you with a very, very big and joyful hope to see you all next year at the Cervantes Institute, possibly in person. And so I say to you all, arrivederci al 2021 e ciao.
Thank you very much for this kind of opportunity. It's a real honor for me to celebrate with you the European Day of Languages. We celebrate linguistic diversity in the continent, and the title of my presentation is Multilingualism in the European Context. Thank you very much to the Instituto Cervantes for inviting me, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. This brief presentation will be organized as follows. We will talk a little bit about the European context, referring to some important figures. After that, we will talk about multilingualism in the European Union. We will be asking the question of whether multilingualism is a blessing or a curse. And we will try to see ways of bridging the linguistic gap that exists in a continent as diverse as ours. And we will do this by looking at two areas, if you want. One is the digital single market, which has gained prominence in the last years. And the other area is, of course, language education, which in a place like the Instituto Cervantes is, of course, paramount. Finally, we will talk about the future, where we will be posing more questions than offering answers, but hopefully this will allow for some reflection, some food for thought. So here we go. The languages of the European Union. There are actually 24 official languages, but those are not the only ones in Europe. There are actually 60 more languages that don't enjoy official status in the European Union, but they might be official in their respective countries. You could think of examples, for instance, in Spain, where Catalan is, of course, an official language in Spain, but is not a language that is official in the European Union. There are also 3 alphabets in total, and there are, of course, hundreds of dialects. Wherever you go to a different place, you will find a particular geographic variety of a particular language. So we are talking about a very, very good example of linguistic diversity. There are also many other languages brought by immigration, brought by globalization, if you want, in such a way that, for instance, many people at present study Mandarin Chinese in Europe. But in general, we could say that Europe is an extremely linguistically diverse area, part of the world. And in fact, there are citizens of at least 175 nationalities represented in the European Union. That's not a figure that we can easily ignore. Linguistic diversity is something basically taken for granted at this point in the European Union, which in a way is a good thing, because all linguistic varieties, no matter whether they have official status or not, are respected in accordance with Article 22 of the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights. And the article, though brief, is very clear. Cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. The Union shall respect cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. Okay, so as you can see, the article is rather cursory. It's very brief, but languages are respected, and this is something that is in accordance with the European Union's motto that we are united in diversity. Okay, linguistic diversity is highly respected in the European Union, as we can see, for instance, on the website of the European Commission. The harmonious coexistence of European languages is a powerful example of unity through diversity, a cornerstone of the European project. So again, this aligns very well with the motto above, united in diversity. That's why, among other reasons why we celebrate the European Day of Languages in the continent. So, for many people, multilingualism more generally is a wonderful thing. You learn more languages, you learn more cultures, but, are there any hindrances? Are there any disadvantages associated with multilingualism? Well, it's clear that being multilingual means being multicultural. When you learn a language, you're also learning the culture born by that language. So in that respect, there are many benefits about multilingualism. And it's not just culture. There are actually cognitive benefits that relate to your brain, to your mind. So we know that children who acquire more than one language from early on, display a number of skills, of cognitive skills that other children may lack. We also know that there's some evidence that learning more than one language, particularly during a childhood, actually gives you benefits in the long term. For instance, a delay on the onset of Alzheimer's disease, for instance. There are also numerous professional benefits, such as being more employable in a more and more international job market, for instance, being able to translate, being able to communicate with more people, and needless to say, cultural benefits, such as being able to travel, being able to become aware of other cultures and customs, and so on and so forth. So, up to here, it's clear that multilingualism is definitely something positive, something that's going to bring about a number of benefits, a number of gains. But it's also important to ask the question of whether multilingualism also poses a number of challenges, if you want. And it seems clear that multilingual Europe has a number of potential challenges, if you want, or real challenges, in fact, related to the fact that there are many languages represented in the Union, and therefore not everybody is able to communicate with each other. For some, language barriers equal economic barriers. Why? Well, because of course we have a lot of online activity at present, and engagement is impaired because we don't speak similar languages, or we don't understand each other's languages all the time. This also compromises access to digital assets, for instance, if they are not rendered in different linguistic varieties. And, information that might be required is not always easy to access. And those are potential problems, challenges, if you want, that we face as a multilingual union. Just to give you an example, 43% of Europeans will not make a purchase on the internet, will not buy any products or services if those are sold in languages other than the ones they speak. Well, this, comes as a logical thing, right? If you don't understand the language, you're not going to put your credit card number. That's something important. So, we obviously need to tackle issues like this. Similarly, it's been pointed out that, for instance, the wealth of the European Union's educational and cultural content is actually confined within linguistic communities. We need to share knowledge. We need to speak a common language, if you want, okay? Not just metaphorically. We need to go beyond our linguistic communities to be able to enjoy, to be able to make the best of the richness that characterizes our education and our culture. So, those are some potential challenges, as I said, but the question is, how do we bridge the linguistic gap? We need to have a positive attitude, and we need to find solutions to problems. Well, The first thing that comes to mind is obviously the teaching and learning of foreign languages. And yeah, of course, this is an important thing, and we will go back to this point in due course. But this is only to a certain extent, because realistically, learning the European Union's 24 official languages and perhaps some other 60 European languages is not really realistic. It's a formidable task. I don't really know if there's any individual in the European Union who has full mastery of all the languages that the Union possesses, but this is something that clearly we cannot expect. Even, the most talented child being exposed to languages wouldn't have the time, the physical time to actually acquire all of those languages. So this is clearly unlikely and not something very feasible. What about a lingua franca? For instance, English or French or German. We will go back to this point towards the end of the presentation. Well, English, obviously, there's the big question mark of what will happen with the status of English in the European Union after Brexit, okay? Clearly, having a lingua franca is helpful, that's for sure. But what can we do on top of trying to learn foreign languages, on top of speaking, say, English and or French? Well, Umberto Eco already mentioned something that I think summarizes it all. The language of Europe is translation. So if we think of the digital single market, which has become paramount, in particular now when digital purchases have become more and more common in our lives, they've become commonplace basically. One of the solutions, as Umberto Eco noted, if you want the 21st century version of Umberto Eco's claim, is actually the need to introduce sophisticated language technologies, automated translation that will enable people to reliably make purchases and do transactions in a language that they don't speak, but still they have, as I said, reliable, secure access to. This has benefits even beyond Europe, because obviously language technologies will go beyond the languages of Europe in such a way that, for instance, if you want to buy something from China, even though it's not a European country, you will still be able to take advantage of these language technologies. This will facilitate more generally our online life. For instance, email writing. When you are composing an email, you want the grammar, spell checker. When you try, of course, to search for information on the web, the fact that people are brought together more and more via social networks, and we know a lot of those: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on and so forth. And that's an important thing that, sophisticated language technologies will facilitate. Similarly, online crime prevention in order to prevent crimes is also something enabled, if you want, by automated, by these language technologies. And of course, also the development of assistive technologies, spoken language access, dictation systems. Those are important in a union where, of course, some individuals are disabled, and also there is clearly evidence of an aging population that will need access to, say, spoken language facilities, for instance. Okay. What about teaching? Clearly, we cannot fully rely on translation, because that would be a bit sad. That's good for the digital market, and the digital market, its importance cannot be underestimated. But we still need to communicate with people. We still need to learn the cultures and other languages. So clearly, we cannot learn all of Europe's languages. That's not a feasible task. One ambitious goal of the Union is actually that all citizens should learn at least 2 foreign languages, okay? Again, it is ambitious. 2 foreign languages. This means 2 languages in addition to your own language, to your first language, also referred to as your mother tongue, okay? And crucially, this should happen at an early age. there is a lot of evidence that the younger we are as language learners or language acquirers, the more likely we will succeed in the task of mastering the target language. Okay, so children will have much better pronunciation, will be much more fluent the younger they start. Okay, that is something pretty much agreed upon in the field of science of language linguistics. According to the Eurostat, okay, some statistics from 2017, 94% of primary and high school age children, I mean citizens or well, children and or adolescents study English, 22 study Spanish, 18.1 study French, 17.4 study German, and those are not figures to ignore. Of course, English continues to be a very important language throughout the world. It's the world's lingua franca since World War II. And of course, these figures also point to the importance, the growing importance of Spanish, but the figures also indicate that French and German are very, very important European languages. Actually, an interesting piece of data I thought I would bring to your attention is that 55.1% of adults in the European Union, whose age ranges from 55 to 64, actually say that they have competence, a good command of another language. It seems to me that it's a big figure, and of course it's an average, and different countries vary in this respect. How is language taught in the European Union? Well, of course, there are as many approaches as there are countries. European Union countries have actually implemented different methodologies to language teaching and learning. This depends upon a number of factors, historical factors, cultural factors, the number of people in the country, the importance of their own language historically. Okay, it is not the same to speak a minority language than to speak a language that belongs, say, to a big empire in the past. And in fact, for instance, some countries that are rather small and whose languages are really not spoken by many people, have traditionally promoted the learning of English from very early on, and they have done that very successfully, right? They've done it for a long time now at very early levels in education. And, there's always also something beyond education, which is common practices, if you want, good practices that enable language learning. For instance, there are countries where dubbing is not really that important, and they use subtitles for films. A good example would be Portugal, as opposed to Spain, where the dubbing industry is actually one of the best in the world, because we don't like subtitles, we tend to dub them, everything. And of course, if you are exposed to natural language samples from early on, it's more likely that you will acquire that language and that you will be you will have sufficient exposure, if you want, to speech in that language. There is actually a common methodology that is implemented at present, and that has been done by many, many administrations in the European Union. And this refers to content language integrated learning, also known as CLIL. For instance, in Spanish, the acronym used is AICLE. Okay, this happens at primary and secondary levels. Basically, as the name indicates, the philosophy behind CLIL is that you're advocating the simultaneous learning of content on a par with a foreign language, in such a way that you will be teaching about a particular area of inquiry, for instance, art history, and you will be doing it in the target language. So the teacher will be preparing materials that contain the appropriate structures and the appropriate expressions that will enable the student to learn about a particular topic, our history, as in our example, on a par together with a foreign language, okay? So it's extremely attractive, and it's been pretty successful, it seems, at primary and secondary levels. It's still implemented in, as I said, by most administrations, but there are still many questions, such as why it's not implemented at present as often with adults. This is a pending issue, as you can see, and there are different if you want, initiatives, and the Instituto Cervantes of Manchester is actually a good example where this kind of methodology is being explored, investigated for adult language learning as well. Okay, so there's still things to do with this content language integrated learning methodology. And beyond compulsory education, of course, and of course, I'm preaching to the choir here because we are at the Instituto Cervantes, and this event is organized in collaboration with a number of like organizations. There are different organizations that do devote themselves to the promotion of the learning of the country's culture and language overseas. Okay, and this happens, of course, beyond the confines of the European Union. We have many examples, and we are lucky to have those in order to promote the culture and the language, of course, of each country. So, what's the future? Well, here I would just like to throw some questions at you, food for thought. Of course, there will be more questions than answers. We cannot deny the arrival of pandemics. I hate to use the plural, but I don't want to sound pessimistic, but clearly pandemics have become part of our life. This means that we are entering the era of online language teaching. Who knows what will happen? Thank goodness, some students still want physical face-to-face teaching, but of course, online instruction has become important. Our online life had grown dramatically in the last years, but now it's become even bigger. And it seems that now we have to become more digital in many respects. There's the question of whether there will be more reduced physical mobility of citizens. Right now, being on a plane seems to be a bit risky, and many people are afraid of actually going somewhere else. Hopefully a solution will be found to this problem, but who knows if our mentality will change, and as a result, online life will increase. Therefore, we will need more assisting tools to facilitate our communication given how many languages we have in the Union. And then there's also obviously the question of the role of English as a lingua franca in the European Union, given the impending Brexit that will take place presumably at the end of this year. In this respect, it's important to note that English, French, and German, for instance, enjoy a high status as procedural languages in the European Commission, but the European Parliament actually accepts the 24 official European languages. Those are referred to as working languages. In other words, you can actually use any of those 24 official languages when doing transactions with the European Parliament. So, even though English might be an important language now, clearly there's French and German. Some people have made the claim that English should abandon the European Union as a language, but of course this is not accurate. There's obviously also Ireland as part of the European Union, and English is very common across the world, and it's really ingrained, if you want, everywhere. So it's highly unlikely that English will lose its prominence, if you want, in the European Union. So tomorrow there is a very interesting activity that I wouldn't like to miss, and I wouldn't want you to miss it either. I give you the information here. If you just Google Multilingualism Day 2020, you will see what will be taking place in Brussels, involving translators and different practices there. So I think this will be a very interesting activity, very appropriate for this celebration. So this is the end. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't bored you to death. It's been a real pleasure. I give you some selected references there, and I encourage you to think about some of the questions we've raised here. I think it's a fascinating topic. I think we're very lucky to live in such a diverse continent. And if you have any questions, by all means, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer them via email, and we can also do video conference, and hopefully we will see each other soon. Thank you very much.